You're listening to the story. The Cheyenne woman was cursed to die alone until a Ute warrior defied his tribe to love her. A tale of solitude, survival, and a love so forbidden shattered the laws of two nations. Stay until the end, because this isn't just a story about curses and enemies. It's about how one act of kindness can rewrite a destiny written in fear. The year was 1876, and the wind over the Sierra Hills sang only to the forgotten Sarteo. Once called, Star Woman lived far from the warmth of fire, circles, and laughter. Her shelter, a lean-to of hides pressed against a cold cliffside, clung to the edge of existence as stubbornly as she did. To the Cheyenne, she was a shadow, not banished in name, but sentenced by fear. It hadn't always been this way. She had once run with the other girls, laughed with her sisters, shared roots, and whispered dreams around the evening fires. But all that vanished after a season of relentless misfortune. Her father had died during a sudden fever, a prized hunting horse vanished in the snow. Her brother never returned from a scouting mission, and when a second child in her family perished weeks later, the whispers began. The medicine man, old and bitter, declared it plainly. She is marked, a bringer of misfortune. Her spirit is cursed. That was all it took. No trial, no farewell, just distance. The tribe stopped calling her name. Food was left near the edge of the brush, ne'er by hand, always with silence. Even the children, once her playmates, looked away. She became a ghost among her own. She had been a teenager then, now nearly 30. The silence had grown thicker than her deer hide blanket. Her hands were calloused, her steps practiced. Each day was survival, each night endurance. The land gave her little, dried roots, stringy rabbits caught in handmade snares, water from a spring that never froze. She spoke to no one. The rocks didn't answer. The stars never blinked dot until that one evening. The sky bled into violet bruises as the sun dipped beyond the hills. Sarteo had just returned with a rabbit when she heard it a noise too heavy for wind. A muffled cry, followed by the sound of something collapsing. Alarm sparked through her. She dropped the rabbit and grabbed her bow. Carefully, quietly, she moved through the scrub. Her senses honed by solitude picked up every shift in the wind, every crunch of rock. She crept to the edge of the spring and froze. There, sprawled awkwardly against a jagged outcrop, lay a man, not Cheyenne. His clothing, though torn and soaked with blood, bore the markings of the Ute, her people's enemies. His leg was twisted unnaturally. A dark red stain spread across his chest. His eyes were shut tight, his face contorted in pain, and he was alone. Sarteo's breath caught in her throat. Every instinct told her to turn away. He was dangerous. If he woke, he might attack. If his people found him here, she could be accused of ambush or betrayal. Worse, what if the curse they believed in was real? What if touching him brought ruin to him too? But another part of her, the part that still remembered what it felt like to belong, couldn't walk away. She hesitated, crouching low, bow drawn. The man stirred slightly, his breath shallow, ragged. He would not last the night. She should leave him. Let the earth reclaim him. Let his people mourn. But what kind of life had she lived if she could no longer show mercy? Her hand trembled. Then she lowered the bow. Dragging him wasn't easy. It was heavier than he looked. Muscles knotted from years of battle. She grit her teeth, fingers digging into his coat, pulling him inch by painful inch toward her shelter. Inside, she laid him gently on her only fur-patchy bison hide that had served as her bedding. She lit her tallow lamp, its flickering glow barely cutting through the dimness. The wound on his shoulder was deep, but not fatal. She recognized the type, likely a lance or arrow. The leg was worse. The bone beneath the skin was clearly shattered. She cleaned the wounds with water from her spring, crushed a handful of blood-staunching leaves, and bound them tightly using strips of old hide. Her hands moved with a gentleness she hadn't used in years, not since her mother had taught her how to bind a child's scraped knee. When she finally sat back, the man was still breathing, alive, but only barely. She watched him for a long while. His face, even in pain, looked fierce, scarred, a warrior's, life carved in every line. "What are you doing?" she whispered to herself. No one answered. The silence was no longer empty, was questioning. That night, she didn't sleep. She kept the fire low, feeding it slowly with dry twigs. She checked his wounds 3 times. When his breath hitched, she cooled his forehead with water. By dawn, she had already decided. If he lived, she would help him. If he died, she would bury him with honor. Her curse, if it existed, had already stolen everything else. Let it try to take her compassion, too. When the Ute warrior finally opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the flickering shadow of firelight dancing across the stone ceiling. The second was her face weathered by sun, eyes wary yet calm. "You're awake," she said simply. He winced, trying to move. Pain shot through his shoulder and leg. He fell back with a strangled groan. "You shouldn't try yet," said, kneeling beside him and offering a shallow stone bowl filled with water. "Your leg is broken. Key in the wound on your shoulder was bleeding heavily when I found you." His eyes narrowed. "You're Cheyenne," he said hoarsely. She didn't flinch. Yes, that word hung between them like a blade. He stared at her, assessing. His suspicion was sharp expected. To him, she was the enemy. To her people, he was the same. Yet, here they were, alone together in a space too small for hatred and too raw for lies. "I should not be here," he muttered. "No," she said. "Neither should I." That answer confused him, but he didn't press. Instead, he accepted the water. He drank greedily, then coughed, spilling some down his chest. She reached to steady the bowl, and he tensed, then let her trust, even a sliver. Had begun. His name was Kirik. She learned this on the 3rd day. When his fever finally broke and he was able to speak longer than a sentence or two. "You have cared for me," he said, voice rough. She didn't answer at first. She was grinding herbs beside the fire, her back to him. "Because I found you," she said finally. "'Cause you were dying. It's not a reason most would. Except I'm not most," she said. He nodded slowly, grimacing as he adjusted his weight. "You're alone. So are you." Those 4 words carried more meaning than either of them could say. Neither asked the other to explain. As the days passed, their rhythms began to intertwine. Soteo hunted rabbits with her snares. She gathered roots, cooked quietly, and offered Kirik small portions, snuff to keep him alive. He, in turn, began carving a small wooden bird from a driftwood scrap she'd found near the spring. His hands moved with precision, even as his body ached. They still spoke little. But words weren't the only language. She noticed how he watched her movements, how she used her elbow to stoke the fire, how she bit her lip when thinking. He saw how carefully she checked his wounds, how she never flinched. Even when the pus turned foul, she stitched a tear in his buckskin shirt. He mended her old bowstreng. Each act, however small, was a whisper of trust. One night, the wind howled louder than usual, clawing at the hide roof. Rain came hard and sudden. Their shelter groaned against the storm. A gust tore a strip of hide loose, and water streamed in. Kirik, still weak, sat up with a hiss. "Hold it," he barked, his warrior instinct overriding pain. She rushed to the side, pressing her body against the frame, trying to keep the water out. He dragged himself beside her, teeth gritted, using his good leg and a makeshift crutch. Together, they fought the wind. Together, they won. When the storm passed, they collapsed beside the fire, soaked and shivering, but alive. Keurig looked at her. Truly looked. Not as a Cheyenne. Not as a woman cursed. But as someone brave, capable, strong. You're not what I expected, he said. She laughed softly, a sound unfamiliar even to her own ears. Neither are you. In the quiet that followed, he asked the question that had lingered since his first conscious thought. Why were you alone? She didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said, they believe I carry bad spirits. A curse. Keurig didn't scoff. He had seen such things before, people marked as unlucky, cast out. Sometimes the reasons were mysterious, sometimes petty, but the pain was always real. And you? She asked. Why were you alone? A raid went wrong, he said. He thought it was a small patrol. It wasn't. I fell from my horse, trying to escape. Your people must be looking for you, he nodded. They'll come. A silence followed, not tense, not fearful, just aware. When they came, what would they find? On the 10th day, Keurig tried to stand fully, his legs splinted carefully, by Sateo's handiwork, held barely. He leaned against the rock wall and breathed through the pain. Don't overdo it, she warned, crossing the shelter with her water skin. He didn't answer, but she could see the lines of determination in his face. She respected that. She had lived by that same look for years. That evening, he offered her the wooden bird he'd carved. For you, he said simply. She took it, fingers trembling. Thank you. The gesture so small, so sincere, meant more than words could dot it. Meant, I see you in their silence. Something bloomed. Not love, not yet, but recognition. A warrior, trained to fight. Now nursed back to life by someone he'd been taught to hate. A woman condemned to solitude, now sharing breath and space with someone who chose to stay. They were not healed, okay? But they were no longer alone. And that, perhaps, was the first true wound their tribes would never understand. The days stretched long in the canyon, and the lines between seasons blurred. Summer's golden heat was giving way to the cold bite of early autumn. The wind had changed, carried not just dust now, but the smell of what was coming. Decisions, dangers, and endings. But for now, in that narrow pocket of peace carved into the rock, Sateo and Keurig found something they hadn't felt in years: belonging. Each morning, Sateo checked her snares while Keurig managed the fire, using a long stick to stoke it from his place against the shelter wall. Though still unable to walk freely, he had learned to shift around, relying on the crutch she fashioned from a young tree branch. In those days, silence no longer felt empty. It became shared space. She would bring in wild onions or rabbit, and he would clean the hides, sometimes humming low under his breath in a language unfamiliar to her, but soft, like prayer. At night, the fire crackled between them. She leaned back on her furs, carving flint arrowheads, while Keurig worked on small wood sculptures. Another bird, a fox, once even a tiny flute. Why animals? She asked one evening, watching his hands. They're never alone, he said. They know who they are. She looked into the flames. I used to know. He didn't ask for more, but she spoke anyway. I was named Star Woman when I was born, she said quietly. It was a name of hope. They said I would bring good visions, dreams. My grandmother called me the daughter of brightness. What changed? She asked. She hesitated, then shrugged. Death, bad luck, too much loss, too quickly. They needed a reason. I was there. Keurig looked at her, not with pity, but with something from her recognition. I was called a storm child once, he said. Born during a flash flood, my mother bled for days. Some thought I stole her strength. Did you? She asked. No, but she died anyway. Another silence. But this one felt less heavy, more like ground cleared for something to grow. On the 12th night, a storm returned, this time fiercer, The sky went black in minutes, and rain lashed the earth like whips. Lightning forked through the sky, striking close enough that the earth shook beneath them. Their shelter groaned. The side of the roof peeled back, rain pouring in. Keurig moved immediately, dragging himself toward the wall with his crutch. "Hold this corner," he called out, voice urgent. Quickly, Soteo grabbed the loosened hide and pressed it back down. The wind screamed. "Lash it," he shouted. She tied it with old sinew strips, her fingers slipping. He braced the frame with his shoulder, face twisted with pain. Together, breathless and soaked. They held it until the worst passed. Afterward, she collapsed beside him, trembling. She'll be lying down," she said. "You should be somewhere warm and safe," he replied. She looked at him and, for the first time in years, smiled without bitterness. "Maybe I am," she said. The storm had done more than tear at the roof. It had shaken loose something inside them. The next morning, he tried to help her grind berries for tea. She laughed at how clumsy he was, spilling half of it. He apologized. "Sheepish," she said. "No one's done this with me in years." From then on, they did more things together. She showed him how to boil root mash properly. He showed her how to bind a wound tighter with fewer strips. She had never learned the language of friendship after exile, but now she began to. One evening, Keurig tried to stand without help. He braced on the wall, crutch in one hand, leg stiff. Soteo stood beside him, arms ready to catch. "You're not ready," she warned. "I need to know if I can." With a breath, he took one step. The pain was fierce, but he didn't fall. She saw the effort in every muscle, but also the fire in his eyes. "You were a leader, weren't you?" she asked. He nodded. "Then why aren't they here already?" He paused. "They may think I'm dead." The truth hung between them. His people would come eventually, or they wouldn't. And what then? Could he stay? Could she let him go? She looked at him, now balancing better, sweat on his brow but standing. "I never expected a Ute to defend me from a storm," Ski said with a smirk. "And I never expected a Cheyenne to stitch my soul back together," he replied. That night, they didn't speak. They just sat by the fire, their shoulders touching. Not by accident. One morning, Soteo woke to see him staring at the sunrise. She watched him quietly, realizing something had changed. Not in him, in her. The loneliness wasn't consuming her anymore. The silence wasn't cutting. Her hands, once used only for survival, had found purpose in care. He turned and caught her looking. "What?" he asked. She shook her head. "I forgot people could make the world feel warmer." Keurig reached over, hesitated, then touched her hand. "Not everyone is afraid of you," he said. "No," she whispered, "just enough to make you forget who you are." The wind still howled at night, but now it carried less bitterness. The carved bird sat on a shelf near the fire, its beak tilted up like it was watching for stars. And for the first time in years, Soteo stopped fearing that her story would end the way it began, in silence, in shadow, in isolation, because somewhere between the storm and the shared fire, something had changed. Maybe curses could be broken. Maybe hope wasn't a foolish thing, after all. The days that followed brought a different kind of silence. Not the empty one that had haunted Soteo for years, but a tense stillness, like the land itself was holding its breath. Keurig's strength was returning. He could now move without the crutch for short periods, though each step still drew a wince. Soteo helped him gather dry wood, and once she caught him trying to reset one of her snares. "You'll scare the rabbits away," she teased, pulling the cord from his hands. He laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar to both of them. "Okay, then maybe I'll learn how to cook them." They had stopped talking about what might come next, but they both knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. She couldn't keep him safe if others came, and neither tribe would forgive would have blossomed between them, not openly, and certainly not without blood. That morning began like any other. Soteo set out early, walking the narrow path up the ridge to gather water. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of ash and dry grass as she filled the skin. Movement on the horizon caught her eye. Riders, 5-6. She froze. Ute. Their horses moved fast, kicking up dust, heading straight toward the valley. A search party. Her heart kicked against her ribs. K-U-R-U-K. She turned and ran. Water sloshing against her legs, feet skidding on loose gravel. She burst into the shelter, breathless. Keurig sat, sharpening a small blade. Riders, she gasped. Ute. Coming this way? He didn't hesitate. He grabbed his crutch, slung his knife at his belt, and pushed himself up. How far? He asked. Less than 10 minutes. His face went tight. I can't outrun them. Not like this. She scanned the shelter, thinking fast. There's a cave higher up, narrow and hidden. You could stay there. Keurig shook his head. It won't harm me if I'm alone. But you. He turned to her, his voice grim. If they find you here, they'll think you held me prisoner. Or worse. Soteo felt her throat tighten. Then I'll go. They won't find me. He stepped closer. Soteo, if they see even a trace of you, ... She didn't let him finish. I've lived hidden most of my life. I know how to disappear. They locked eyes, both knowing this was no longer about shelter or kindness. It was about survival. It's about everything they had begun to feel and couldn't yet speak aloud. She turned to run, but he caught her hand. Whatever happens, he said, thank you. But she didn't get far. The sound of hooves echoed across the rocks, closer than expected, and then another sound. Different. Shouts, not Ute. Soteo whipped around from the opposite ridge. More riders were approaching. Cheyenne, her people. They had seen her sprinting toward the rocks. They had seen the smoke, and they were converging. Panic clutched her chest. This was no longer a matter of hiding. This was war. Back at the shelter. Keurig stood at the entrance, crutch planted firmly, knife drawn. He watched the Ute riders arrive with a grim set to his jaw. They reined in hard, expressions dark. Keurig, one barked. We thought you were dead. Another scanned the shelter. What is this place? Why are you here? Then came the voice he recognized, Vulcan, his childhood friend turned hardened warrior. You've been injured, Vulcan said, eyes narrowing. But you're not alone. A moment later, the Cheyenne appeared, and from both sides, the realization dawned. Soteo emerged, bow in hand, expression unreadable. The air thickened. Keurig stepped forward, just barely, his body a shield. Leave her out of this, he said. She is Cheyenne, one Ute snarled. An enemy. She saved me, Keurig said. Vulcan frowned. And you're defending her? What madness is this? She tended my wounds, shared her food. Without her, I'd be bones in the sun. She may have been trying to ransom you. She could have left me to die. The Cheyenne warriors looked equally tense. One recognized her, eyes filled with old superstition. Star woman, he whispered, almost like a curse. She's cursed. Another muttered. She's brought outsiders here. This confirms it. Soteo stepped beside Keurig, back straight. I've never brought harm to any of you. Only silence. That's what you left me with. A Cheyenne man raised his bow. You threaten us now by sheltering him. Lower your weapon, Keurig snapped. You don't give orders here, Ute. Keurig turned to both groups. Then hear this. I owe her my life. She has more honor than any man who would leave someone to die in the dust. She is cursed, a Cheyenne said again, voice cracking. The only curse, Keurig shouted, is your fear. Then came the moment that broke everything. I choose her, Keurig declared. If she is an outcast, then so am I. I will not leave her. Not now, not ever. The Ute riders stared, stunned. Cheyenne stepped forward. If you choose this path, you are no longer Ute. You'll be banished. I understand. The Cheyenne warriors said nothing. Soteo's people, always so quick to condemn, now found their certainty fraying. Keurig looked at them all. You left her to die alone. I won't. I refuse. Then Vulcan, after a long silence, gave a slow, bitter nod. Go then, he said. Go, and may your curse follow you both. As the riders retreated, Ute and Cheyenne, both Soteo, stood frozen, unsure if the confrontation had truly passed. Keurig's hand found hers, solid, warm. She looked up, tears burning her eyes. You would give up your people for me? She asked, barely above a whisper. I would give up everything, he said, 'cause you gave me more than they ever did. In that shattered silence, a different kind of world began to form, not built on tribe or tradition, but on something far older and far more dangerous: choice. They left before dawn. Not in haste, but with quiet purpose. Soteo gathered her few belongings, her worn bow, a flint blade, her fur-lined blanket, and the little wooden bird Keurig had carved. Keurig leaned heavily on his crutch, his body still aching from the trials of healing and confrontation. But his spirit had never been more resolute. No one followed them. Neither the Ute nor the Cheyenne warriors returned to that cursed valley. And so, for the first time in her life, Soteo was no longer running from solitude. She was walking towards something new, with someone beside her. They moved slowly. The land was harsh, but no longer hostile. The same mountains that once echoed her isolation now bore witness to her transformation. They found a hidden place, a small, sheltered valley tucked between towering mesas and shielded by narrow ridges. It had water, game, trees for firewood. More importantly, it had peace. There, they built their new home. Their shelter began as a simple lean-to, but it grew stronger with each passing week. Keurig cut saplings and bound them with sinew, stale, wove hides and bark into weather-resistant panels. Together, they created something sturdier than either had ever known, something they both owned, both needed, and in that space, their bond deepened. He still walked with a limp, and she still bore the invisible weight of years lost. But neither wore their wounds as shame anymore. Nights were spent in warmth, not just from fire, but from laughter, real laughter, sometimes soft, sometimes loud. Once, when Keurig failed at skinning a rabbit and turned it into a mangled mess, Soteo laughed until her stomach hurt. You're a warrior, not a cook, she teased. I'm trying, he groaned. How was I to know rabbits are so delicate? In those small, ridiculous moments, they rediscovered joy. They shared stories, some painful, some playful. Keurig told her of his boyhood raids and his brother, who always ran too fast to catch. Soteo confessed she used to sing to the stars as a girl, believing they listened. I think they did, he said once, looking up. I think they led me to you. She didn't answer, but she reached for his hand. One morning, Keurig found her, standing at the edge of the ridge, watching the horizon. Do you regret it? She asked, leaving everything. He walked to her side, slowly, then looked where she was looking. No, he said. My people left me long ago. I just didn't realize it until you reminded me what it meant to be seen. She turned to him, eyes soft. I still fear the curse. It's that one day you'll wake up and wonder what you gave up. Keurig cupped her face gently. What I gave up was silence. What I found was life. Day built more than a home. Day built rhythm. Soteo hunted in the early mornings while Keurig prepared herbs and food. He had learned to walk farther each day. The limp remained, but it no longer slowed him. She taught him how to read tracks. He taught her how to carve more than just tools, beauty, like birds and animals. Small things with no purpose other than joy. In time, she sang again. It started one dusk by the fire. Her voice cracked, rusty from disuse. The Keurig said nothing, just listened. The song was ancient, Cheyenne in origin, a lullaby, a pay. Her mother's tears glistened in her eyes when it ended. She looked embarrassed. Keurig said, "Sing again." The seasons changed. Snow came softly, blanketing the valley in silence. But this time, it was a good silence, a warm one. They spent the winter in close quarters, crafting, mending, surviving. When the winds howled, they huddled together, wrapped in furs, exchanging stories under the flicker of firelight. They didn't speak of tribes anymore, not much. That life had passed. One night, long after the last snow melted, Keurig took the wooden bird he had carved, the first thing he made when she saved him, and placed it on a ledge above their door. "This is where we began," he said. She nodded. "And this is where we live now." Sometimes Salteo would wonder if her people ever spoke of her. If the Cheyenne remembered the girl they'd called cursed. She doubted it. The past had a way of forgetting those it pushed away, but Keurig never forgot. He never let her forget either. That she was brave, that she had saved him, that she was worth choosing, worth protecting, worth building a future with. He saw her, and in turn, she began to see herself not as cursed, not as forgotten, but as free. On the first day of spring, Keurig presented her with something new. A necklace, simple beads, a bare tooth, and a single carved star made of bone. "For a star woman," he said. "For the woman who found me when I was nothing but breath and blood on the dirt." Salteo held the necklace, her eyes wide. "I'm not cursed anymore," she whispered. "No," he said. "You never were." And then, for the first time, he kissed her. The years ahead would not be easy. They would still be hunted if either tribe ever crossed paths with them. They would live without community, without the safety of numbers. But they had each other, and that, for Salteo, was more than she'd ever hoped for. Her name had once been a promise. Now, it was a truth. She was Star Woman, bright, enduring, and she was no longer alone.